a fraud problem that's affecting enterprises significantly. And through this discussion, I'm really confident we'll be able to help put perspective around this challenge and where the technology can help stop these types of issues and potentially at least make everyone aware of where exposure is being exploited and all the different enterprises are receiving these challenges. My name is Maurie Munro. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Sales here at Transaction Network Services. And Krishna, real quick.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Krishna here. I'm the Senior Director, Product Manager, especially for both call enrichment services and call protection services, basically, around the enterprise voice security. All right to you.
Great, thank you. This conversation is best captured a little bit on the next slide here on a table of contents that is I'm going to help kind of through this discussion explain the who, what, where, why, when, typical dialogue, but in really addressing where this type of situation is originating, it's simply with impersonators. Now, we have discussed impersonation attacks on previous calls that were outbound in nature. And in those impersonation attacks, the target customer, their target to exploit is any end user with a mobile phone. This is in the opposite direction now that, of course, since fraud is such an issue, the problem now, if all of you can kind of envision, is the conversations going into enterprises or into their contact centers. And this is definitely a significant concern that for some of the enterprises might surpass the concern that somebody else is calling their customers. We noticed that the attacks themselves are well orchestrated. In order to do so, social engineering comes into play. They know exactly who they're calling. They know that there's different inbound call tactics we're going to discuss that exploit platforms, the inbound contact centers themselves that have IVRs or anything of that nature. So we're going to get into a little bit of that, which of the organizations they target most significantly. You'll find that, yes, financials are obviously the go-to target for monetary exploitation or defrauding. But when you also consider what happens if they can exploit a hospitality or retail enterprise for the purposes of gaining your personal information, the monetization of all of these different efforts is just going to continue to morph. And the most key consideration is what happens when they can impersonate not just you, but your voice. And in that synthetic AI experience, it's very detrimental if we truly don't have protective measures in place. Krishna, I'm going to kind of let you start to transition into how this technology that we're going to introduce here can be implemented by enterprises in ways that protect those contact center employees, those agents, if you will, and start to put a stop to a lot of the issues where they have no protective measures, and potentially through solutions in the industry, through technology in the industry, they can start to feel a lot more protected and understand the nature of who's calling them.
Absolutely, Maurie. Thank you. So, I mean, let's establish the size of the problem in the inbound space, basically. I mean, vishing is predominantly challenging all the enterprises as of today itself. Like indicating on the slides, it's almost like one in every call is almost as threatening. And the expectation, according to the Global Threat Report from CrowdStrike, is that this market is actually, I mean, I will not say the market, the challenge around fraud is actually going to grow to almost like $40 billion by 2027. And just in the last half year, it has actually grown in terms of the vishing attacks by almost around 40%, basically. When I say vishing, it is actually utilizing the voice channel to conduct fraud, basically. Whether it is IVR mining, whether it is direct impersonation using synthetic voice, or using Gen AI to actually mimic our voices, our actual voices. So independent of the type of the route that they take, vishing is considered as is like a cybersecurity threat using the voice channel basically. And also the fact with the advent of these AI capabilities, they're inventing new ways to actually take over the accounts or to conduct fraud basically. And these are all mainly happening at the contact center as we speak. So I will explain vishing, but mainly it is happening what is called as a toad attack, which is actually based on telephone oriented or attack delivery, which is actually a combination of voice based attacks and email based attacks and how they're orchestrating the fraud basically. And also the biggest challenge is that it is not just about doing spoofed calls, but it does also come up to the challenge of impersonation, which is posing as somebody to extract information or actually establish trust that you are that person in the process of doing the account takeover and actually resulting in fraud basically. And apart from these, they are also utilizing voice channel as an attack, which is called as a TDoS attack, by occupying the channels of the contact centers whereby real customers or legitimate calls are not getting serviced. That actually is leading into customer frustration and also operational losses for the brand because they're not actually catering to their customers. So there are several challenges around how these fraudsters are actually utilizing all these capabilities to attack us different scenarios basically. That leads to what is happening because of these attacks basically. Like I have just explained, the customer service is actually frustrated because they're actually dealing with calls that they don't really need to deal with. And that actually caters to the challenge of actually treating customers in a bad way, leading to bad customer experience. And also in the process, sometimes they are vulnerable. Humans are also vulnerable to be attacked and extracted from information from. That actually results in revenue losses. And all of these three factors lead into what is called as a result in brand challenges and brand reputation. This is what is actually causing one of the major challenges in the voice channel part of contact center, basically. So one of this actually leads to how are we dealing with how can we address this now. Awareness is the first part. Hey, we do have weaker enterprise voice channel security because we're still dealing with what is called as knowledge-based authentication, which is actually asking questions about personal information that the enterprise already knows. But this is information that people are able to gather from either social engineering or from dark web or from hacks that have happened, basically. And the past investments are not keeping up with the evolution happening in the fraud tactics, basically. And this leads to vulnerability in enterprise IVR systems. For example, when you're actually, let's say you're calling an airlines, hey, we have recognized you by this number, and then say your flight is delayed. And instead of actually going through much more passive authentication, they actually give out more information than necessary, which others where the fraudsters are actually mining the information. And this also leads to human error, which actually they're more vulnerable to be attacked than systems. Maurie, I'll actually let you lead how actually these organizations are actually at risk.
Yeah, I was working with a financial institution in the southeast, and they were actually deploying an outbound uh, solution of protective measures so that their customers could only be contacted by them, effectively whitelisting their phone numbers and stopping any impersonation on that outbound call that impersonators use to reach out to all of us who are consumers. And literally during the implementation, he had to take a moment. He goes, hang on, I got the same guy calling me 3 times inbound to my contact center trying to exploit my agents. The problem that is inbound, especially for financial services, is it's just constant. I mean, it is a daily issue, and in most cases, I know this sounds bad, they're going to go after financials will go after the inbound issue before they address the outbound. Now, all of us are tired of getting called by people who pretend to be our bank and wish that would be stopped immediately. And we certainly hope that the adoption of the technology to do so will be instantaneous. It takes a little bit. But the inbound, think about somebody transferring money out of your account and it's not you and some other person initiated it per se, pretending to be you. And the impact to compliance, to regulatory, to whatever the banking protocols are to stay in good graces from monetary or fiduciary responsibilities they have because they have your money. It's a bad thing when their agents get tricked. And the downward spiral of that issue is they have to remediate that cost and certainly eat that. It's a financial impact to banks at all levels. And as the higher or tier one level banks secure themselves, the problem goes where? Down into regional and local banks that also need to protect themselves, but may not be aware of the different solutions. And it takes time to learn and make good decisions. So that is a very relevant, very, very real issue that we all are participants within, wishing we weren't. Look at healthcare, retail, and hospitality. You get into a lot of PII, you get into your individual information being exploited. And these aren't just random one-off attacks. They're very orchestrated omni-channel efforts that if they can incorporate other ways to bombard the IVR that Krishna mentioned, it's highly detrimental because they don't want to be, they being the impersonators, they don't want to be in an IVR. They don't want to be in an auto attendant or in an interactive voice experience that isn't talking to a human. So in some cases, why not just put 1,000 calls into the platform and see which ones fall out and respond to those? These are all the different attack traits that are used, and these organizations that you see here, these verticals are all highly exploitable. Krishna, next slide.
Yeah.
So basically, what do they need from their inbound call protection? I mean, this is the cybersecurity and regulatory that I mentioned is first and foremost on their minds. One of the interesting topics that I was presented with was we know that banks have insurance. However, it's covering any potential situation where they can be protecting their customers. It's required as part of compliance and regulatory. The thought that somebody had that mentioned to me was, so if they deploy these solutions, these protective measures, could they get a break on that insurance? Personally, I don't know. I haven't talked to enough banks to kind of find out or how that insurance is applied. But being more prepared, I'm sure satisfies not just you, the consumer, or the enterprise, but it's got to protect the insurance companies as well. Because I even did have a bank say, we've got a level of protection. I go, what happens when they go over that? You're now exposed, and the technology and advancements of impersonators in all likelihood will exceed even what somebody has as their minimum expectation. The fraud and identity theft is an obvious nature of the issue. The voice signature authentication and considerations that this problem is going to move into a synthetic voice experience that if you could imagine, if you don't have secondary evaluations of the number they call from or understand more about that inbound call real time. I'm not talking post call. I'm talking real time lookups of who is this person and is it a live call from a number we recognize or can authenticate back to the provider. That's the consideration we are truly looking to connect the dots to. If you call from your cell phone, I should be able to tell it's you by asking the provider. And those types of evaluations are what it takes to really start to stop the malicious actors from bombarding and ultimately getting into contact centers and exploiting the agents. Krishna?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to share a couple of more insights about the challenges around this voice signature authentication. When you're establishing this as one of the authentication methodologies, what happens is that you need to get consent from the end users to deposit their voice signatures. So there are a couple of challenges around here. The amount of security incidents around the world, these actual voice signatures might end up with the bad actors, which actually will result in Gen AI based solution. I mean, I would say Gen AI based practices actually utilizing these voice signatures to actually train the models to do the impersonation for them. That is one challenge. The second challenge is that the penetration of accepting the voice signatures from the end users are that it's actually limited because not everybody. I personally didn't want to use. I didn't actually accept myself to depositing a voice signature with my bank. So from those two standpoints, this is actually a challenge from a standpoint of deploying this as a authentication methodology, both from a vulnerability perspective and also an acceptable practice perspective. The other aspect is that with all these challenges, either whether it's a TDoS attack or whether it is actually impersonation calls, we have actually seen on the outbound side, like Maurie said, approximately if there were 100,000 calls being made outbound to an enterprise, uh, actually almost like 60 to 70% of the calls that we see at the network level are actually impersonator or spoofed calls. Only 30% of those calls were actually from the enterprise. And now imagine the reverse in direction when the calls are being made by the subscriber to the enterprise. Out of the 100,000 calls, if 70,000 calls were actually occupied by malicious actors, that actually is not helping the brand or the contact center that is being deployed for these solutions in delivering a customer experience for the brand, basically.
And
So,
Krishna, I
yeah,
think real quick, I think that you call out the bombardment
yeah,
that is a methodology that, think about this, it's playing the odds. If I can drop 1,000 calls in, I have a good chance that the timeout attributes of the IVR are going to push me to an agent. What are those 1,000 calls doing to the billing methodologies that maybe that customer is paying on a concurrent basis or whatever their
yeah.
agreement is in that contact center? It's trashing good technology through bad people's intentions. And it's also a methodology on the outbound that if I can call 1,000 people, two or three of them are going to be gullible enough to send me money and do different things that outbound impersonation is justified, and that's how come they keep doing it. So the changing of business practices is probably the overreaching theme, and the evaluation of current practices that don't have long-term really relevance. 2FA, how many of you receive a phone call from somebody who told you, and this isn't an outbound impersonation case, hey, I just stopped the fraud real quick. I'm sending you a code. I'll get you reinstated. Just read me back the code. 2FA is, I'd recommend not reading the back of that code because they're about to access your email and change the password, and either that or just port your phone. But 2FA has limitations now through the exploitation of it that somebody better be, banks in particular, stopping that process. So the whole thing is kind of getting flipped on its head from how business is done, methodology and the inner workings of it, so that it stops and protects enterprises to the extent that they're being exploited. And secondary technologies like this, we got to know who's calling, look it up real time, and the backbone networks have that capability through API to determine with relationships back to the wireless providers, is this number real? And even in some of the wireline cases, we're looking them up to see, did they just make up a phone number, and is it not even assigned to the carrier that it's coming in from? So, Krishna?
Hey, and again, these are all awareness is one part of it. In readiness, we have to actually adopt technologies that are more deterministic, as well as actually processes that are actually where people are trained to handle these kind of malicious calls, basically. So what do we want to accomplish in this case is by adopting these technologies and processes to provide a 360 degrees protection both on the inbound and outbound. But on the philosophy behind all these technologies is to adopt zero trust policy, wherein you're actually trusting every call, but also verifying every call. And that actually leads to these passive authentication technologies that will actually lead to better customer experience, and also they will help actually handling more legitimate calls than the fraudsters basically, and actually decrease the overall attack vector on the voice channel basically. And these voice firewalls and spam detection algorithms basically get rid of all these unwanted calls on the contact center queues, whereby they are translating into what I call as better customer experience, better customer agent efficiency, and also overall protection for the brand, basically. And this is how we want at least bring awareness to the industry about how this is becoming a huge challenge where voice channel needs to be recognized as a cybersecurity threat from a CISO perspective, and also to actually make aware that this is a real problem and that is actually shooting up to be a $40 billion problem by 2027. And today it might be a little less, but this is what is evolving in terms of fraud across the industry.
All right. I think that as we navigate now, hopefully some Q&A, that we can help clarify any of the statements and even get into some expanded conversation. We're happy to take some questions. Sarah, I think you might be seeing those right now if we've got some.